Hey
Hey
gardeners!
gardeners!
Amy and Lily here.
And today we're going to show you how we made our tree.
We call it a TreePee.
A TreePee. Great name, Mother.
Isn't that cute? So I saw the most amazing idea online. A person had put together a Christmas tree teepee. And I thought that was just so much fun. I have to try this. And so this is our story of trial and quite a bit of error and what we learned while we made our first Christmas TreePee. So first, we always have to make room for Christmas. This corner is usually home to my pathetic houseplants as well as Lily's learning shelf. This is where all of her books and educational toys and whatnot get stuffed throughout the year, and it usually turns into a gigantic mess after just a week or two. So I love the opportunity to deep clean this corner at least once a year so that we can move the shelf and make room for the Christmas tree. So the first step is obviously setting up the poles. I happened to have a bunch of 6-foot tall garden stakes that I had intended to use as a bean teepee for Lily's garden, but of course I have not gotten around to doing that yet. So I grabbed those out of the garden shed and decided to use them here. I tied 3 together and then added 3 more and tied them together. I tried to tie these close to the top, but by the end of the project they had slipped quite a bit, and so I have a lot of poles sticking out and visible at the top. So if I do this again, I'm going to use taller poles, hopefully at least 8, maybe even 10 feet long, and I will tie them more securely. Next, you can see from the picture that the person who created this originally hung some kind of a sheet or white fabric on the inside of the teepee. I liked this idea because, one, it would hide the garland from the inside, it would make it look more cozy, and it would also prevent you getting poked by all of the garland bits. So I thought that would be a nice addition. I happen to have a blue queen-size sheet that we use in the summer that was just sitting around because it's winter now and it's too cold for that sheet. So I decided to use that. This turned out to be the most difficult part of this project. I pre-measured the sheet by wrapping it around the outside of the poles to make sure that it would be big enough, but I bumped the poles in the process, and every time I did that, the tie slipped. But it looked like it would be good enough, so I gathered the long side together, tied a string around that, put a loop in the string, and then hung that from the top of the posts. Then we cut some strings just a few inches long and tied them to safety pins. Then we were able to tie the safety pins to the poles so that we could pin the sheet to the poles. We did this on a couple of heights to keep the sheet out of our way so that we'd have lots of room in there, but around the bottom the sheet was not long enough to go around the circumference of the bottom of the tree. So I had to sit and think on that one for a while and came back to it a few days later. I tried hanging the sheet again from the corner. This would give me the diagonal length of the sheet to work with. It still didn't quite reach all the way around the bottom circumference, but it was close enough, so I just went with that. Next is adding the garlands. I had purchased 6 12-foot garlands from Home Depot a week before, and it turned out that these were incredibly cheap looking and very sparse. You could see the wire that held the whole thing together, and each little branch on the garland was really far apart, so it took a lot of fluffing of the garlands in order to make these work. After putting the first garland on, I realized this is going to take a lot more than I thought. I had purchased 6, I'd grabbed 1 from my storage, and I went back to Home Depot to buy 8 more. I only wrapped the garland around the visible part of the tree, so the back of the tree is completely uncovered, which is another benefit to having a sheet inside, because otherwise you'd be able to see right through to the wall. But that did save a lot of garland length, so I was able to use less in the long run. The cheap garlands were terrible to work with. If I do this again, I will get better quality. In order to make them work, I pulled each branch out to attempt to make it look more full, and each garland took about 8 to 10 minutes to fluff and put on the tree. I did find that detaching the safety pins made it easier to thread the garlands through between the poles and the sheet, and then I would reattach the safety pins after I was done with that area. I considered doing the sheet part last, but I think that might actually cause other problems, like how do you find and attach the pins while you are inside with a sheet between you and the poles. I just don't think that would work. So I still think putting the sheet on first was the right move. Once I got both of the lower sides done, I was still able to see the poles from outside in the front. So I knew I'd need to add more garland in the doorway, but we'll come back to that in a minute. At the top of the doorway is where I started wrapping the garland all the way around instead of just back and forth. But the garlands kept sliding up. This was frustrating, so I slept on it and tried again the next day. It also looked very sparse from the front, so I added a little zigzag with the garland, switching it back so that the front part was more full. Also, when I started a new garland, I started on one side of the front and went across the front rather than starting on one side and going around the tree first. This ensured that there was the most garland in the very front of the tree and it looked full. As I went, I added a couple of zigzags going back and forth with the garlands again on the front of the tree, and I carefully pushed down each piece. Adding the last garland to the top, it almost didn't make it all the way, and I did have to undo some of that compacting that I had done earlier. The last garland I had was for the doorway. In the photo I found, there was a garland across the floor. I liked the way that separated the inside of the TreePee from the outside room, so I did copy that. To attach the garland to the opening, I simply twisted the branches around the poles and around the other branches. This actually hid the poles really well, and I liked the way it looked. I had a little bit of length left over, so I doubled back around the doorway, again adding more fluff and making the above the doorway look a little fuller. Building this thing took several hours, over a full week with 2 weekends. That took a lot more time than simply cutting down a tree and bringing it into the house, or pulling out your artificial tree and setting it up. So be prepared for that if you do try this at home. I used 15 12-foot garlands. That's a total of 180 feet of garland, and this tree is less than 6 feet high. So if I do this again, I'm going to use longer poles, better quality garlands, and I'm going to tie it much tighter and closer to the top. It's finally time to decorate. So I always start with my lights first, and I always plug in my lights to test them before bothering to put them on the tree. And I'm really glad I did that this year because half of my lights didn't work anymore. So I only had a string and a half to work with, and that was not going to be enough to cover the whole tree. So while I went back downstairs to try to find more lights, Lily took it upon herself to build a nest for all of the bird ornaments, and she has forbidden me to take this down, so here it sits. I had found a couple of new strings, but they were different types of lights. So now I have 3 different styles of lights, which is going to look really goofy if I don't do it right. The trick with this is to put each string over the entire tree so that each one is balanced and somewhat symmetrical. Don't spend time tucking them in until they are in exactly the right place. Just throw them on for now. It took some adjustment and fiddling, but we eventually got it looking all right. Now we took the time to tuck in all of the strings so that only the lights were showing. Next, I like to hang my silver garland. This amplifies the lights and makes the tree look quite a bit brighter. Then I have this really fun ribbon that I like to add to my trees, and it was awesome this year teaching Lily how to uncoil the ribbon instead of stretching it straight so that it would keep its curl and look really nice. I usually add decorative picks to my trees to fill in the gaps between branches, but obviously I had to change that tactic for this tree or there would be sticks poking into the teepee. So I only used a few picks to fill the obvious holes, and I directed the sticks straight up the sides instead of straight in. The poles at the top were really bugging me, and I could not figure out how to put a star on them without it being crooked. So I covered them with a couple of silver picks, and I really liked the way that looked. I honestly think it replaces the star at the top. Next, I added some of my blue picks to fill in the last couple of holes, and I threw a couple up on top as well. I love this silver and blue color scheme. I call it Winter Wonderland. It's one of my favorites. Then I took a break to dance with my baby. It's finally time for ornaments, and at this point the tree looks good enough that Lily can just go wild with them and put them wherever she wants. This is her favorite part, so I let her do most of it by herself. And at the end, we both took a break to have some hot chocolate. There are a few more finishing touches In the photo, there's a blanket, which makes the TreePee super cozy, so of course we needed one of those in ours, and we threw in some throw pillows too. The results are so much fun. Lily loves playing in there and reading in there, and she's even read to us a few times from inside her TreePee.